Everybody, Creative Katie, Karen Burchill here. Welcome to my channel and an art journal tutorial. Today we're working on a black background and we are going to be using the reversing the stencil technique. So if you have a black journal, you can just use that. If not, you can use black gesso. This is TCW black gesso, and I'm just giving my 9x12 Canson mixed media paper a good coat of gesso. It's a little bit thickened over time, so I'm just giving it a little water to help it go on smoothly. So I'm going to be using this butterfly, Sunny Butterfly from Valentina Harper, TCW, but any of her latest stencils, if you've got florals and other butterflies, work perfectly for this technique. Just a reminder, a recap of all the steps will be at the end of the video. So this butterfly does not fit on my page. And that's okay because I like using just part of it. So I'm playing around with the orientation of it, and I'm putting a piece of paper there to say, okay, if I put a sentiment, where will I put the sentiment? So I'm just kind of planning it out. Now that I've decided where I want this, I am just taping this stencil down so it doesn't move. I'm using white gesso here. You can use white acrylic paint if you wish. Putting it on a makeup sponge, stamping off, and then I am just putting the white gesso through the stencil. This is going to get rid of the black and make it very opaque. So when I put colors on it, the colors are going to be bright and bold. And it really kind of flips the stencil and allows me to have black lines around all the color that I'm going to be putting on here. I do 2 coats of gesso. I know it's tempting to get more gesso on there, but you don't want it to go under the stencil. Taking a sneak peek just to make sure that everything's working according to what I have in my head, and it is. I do take time, let it dry. I don't put the heat tool on top of my stencil, and then I come back and I give this a second coat. The more opaque you get it, the brighter your colors. If you have some variation, your colors also have that variation, which is nice. So play with this with Valentina Harper stencils or others. So I've pulled a variety of colors and I'm going to be applying them on here. I don't really have a plan other than I want to keep this symmetrical. So this part of the stencil on the this half of the butterfly I want to keep the same as this half. I'm mixing the paints right on the stencil and right on the makeup sponge. I don't want to keep this pure and exact, slightly impossible to get it just in one area, especially using a makeup sponge, and I'm okay with that. Again, I'm tapping off the paint on the makeup sponge. There's no globby paint on my sponge, and I'm just going over it. If I want it darker, I'm just doing a second layer. Don't press too hard on the makeup sponge. You do not want that paint to squish under. The colors you choose for this are completely up to you. I just want it bright, bold, and beautiful colors. Peeking a little bit to see, is it, again, doing what I think I want it to do. So I'm putting on the colors, but you'll see that I come over top of that color with other colors, and that gives kind of a more variation to the tones. Now with this type of stencil, it's very easy to go over and get some paint where you don't want it on the black area that's showing. And I will show you how to handle that if it happens when this part of the stenciling is done. Here I'm taking the purple, putting it on top of some of the blue areas to get just different variations. Here I'm putting the purple on top of some of the pink. Loving the look. So I'm very happy with how things are progressing. Remember that this video is sped up somewhat. So when you're trying to duplicate or try your own thing, allow yourself more time and remind yourself that when you watch videos, they are sped up, and that gives you a distorted sense of how quickly it should happen. You want to, when you're putting colors on top of other colors, to avoid making mud. Remember, you want to avoid doing that with colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. Colors that are near each other on the color wheel are going to blend and make nice colors. If you inadvertently get mud or a color you don't like, you can let that dry, tap white gesso on it to take it back to square one, and then put color on it. And I did that in some part. Right there, it kind of got muddied. There's the white gesso. I didn't let it dry. Then I'm coming back with the color. I didn't want any dark muted colors on this. Those makeup sponges, I spray them with my Murphy's oil soap and throw them in the bucket of water, and I clean them and reuse them time and time again. So now the moment of truth, the unveiling, and there is this beautiful, colorful butterfly on this black background. It really stands out and looks spectacular. Now here I have some overlap from the makeup sponge, and I'm just getting some black gesso and just painting out anything that I didn't like. You can also use a liner brush and tap in color if you didn't get color where you wanted. And you can tweak what happened and touch it up if you wish to. What I'm going to do next kind of makes this unnecessary in a lot of respects, but do what makes you happy. Giving it a good dry before you go on to the next step. That's another thing that I typically don't show on the videos. Here I've got some black paint on a liner brush, and I'm just touching up, just making sure that I have those black lines. That's just, some of the paint, some of the gesso has seeped under, but again, when I do the next step, it won't matter so much. So here I'm going to do some line work, and I am choosing to use my Fineline Applicator bottle. You can use a Uniball Signo white or the Jelly Roll broad. It's 10, and I just showed you that, and I'll list those in the description box along with the Fineline bottle. This Fineline bottle and many of the TCW stencils that I use, you can get at NinnysNapkins.com or the TCW Shopify store. So in this Fineline bottle, I have white acrylic paint, Liquitex Basics, that I have thinned to the right consistency. And it's just trial and error. And there is a video that shows how to mix it and how I clean that bottle. And I am just using this to outline. I want to brighten this up, add a little bit more contrast. And I am going to go over every part of this stencil. You can choose which parts you want. You could have just done the outline. You could have just done part of them. Your choice. Now it looks like I am doing this and everything's so perfect and smooth. It is far from it. And in the close-ups at the end of the video, you're going to see that. Embrace the imperfections. Now, I've had surgery on my hands, and this bottle is not difficult for me to squeeze. If you get the consistency right, you're putting a gentle pressure on it, but it doesn't fatigue the hand. Now, when you put this on, it stays wet for a while. There's a good amount of it. So you have to be aware to avoid putting your palm or your wrist into the wet paint. So you might need to stop every once in a while and let it dry or dry it. Just a reminder, you can follow me on Instagram at Creative Katie. You often get sneak peeks and reminders about when my YouTube videos and new tutorials come up. I don't show you all the line work, but I am showing you enough of it so that you can see how I'm holding the bottle, which angle I go at. I'm turning the page as I go to get whatever's easiest for me. You can also stop and then come back to it. There's nothing saying you have to do all the line work in one sitting. You can see how this is brightening the page and the stenciling on here. Here we have one side is done and the other side isn't quite done, so you can see. Now you could have left the left side the way it is, or the whole thing. That is a personal choice. You just have two different looks that you can use. Now, once I had done all of it, I decided that I wanted to make the outline and a couple of the basic lines in the middle a little bit broader. So that's what I'm doing now. So I am squeezing the bottle and I'm flooding that, getting quite a bit of paint actually on there, being careful not to put my wrist in it and make a mess. But since everything is acrylic paint underneath it, if that happens, grab a baby wipe, wipe it off, and you should be okay. So I press and I flood and I use the tip to move the paint around. And again, turning the page to make it the easiest way possible. Now my Canson Mixed Media 9x12, this journal I took off the coils. And one of the reasons I did that was to be able to work with it flat. I know that I'll be able to put it back on the coils once all the pages are done. This just makes it easier to video, and it makes it easier to turn the page, turn the book, and it's just easier to work on. And you can see the difference, making this a little bit bolder on the outline compared to what wasn't. Now, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with that background. And my husband said, put a whole bunch of littler butterflies. So I followed his word. This is Beautiful Sentiments. These are also designed by Valentina Harper, and they're also available from TCW. So I am applying acrylic paint with a brayer on these stamps. Now here I got a little too much paint, so I'm wiping it off. And I find using the brayer gives me a good solid coat of it on the stamp. I hold it down. Now I'm not expecting a perfect stamp, and I'm not getting that. This is in the background. You want to avoid moving the stamp. You have to hold it in place. You don't want to smudge it. And because everything's acrylic, if worst case it smudges and you just can't live with it, you can go in, wipe it off with a baby wipe, touch up with the black gesso if you need, and go from there. You see that that was very imperfect stamp, but this is the first layer, and I'm going to do something later that's going to basically make that disappear. Now I'm adding pink, and I'm going to do the same thing with pink. And the colors that I'm using for these butterflies in the background are the ones that are in that focal image butterfly. I love this page. I loved how this turned out. I loved everything about it. In fact, I have plans to do this on a canvas for a wall hanging. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And I may do it differently. I may do the butterflies, this part first, kind of section off where that big butterfly is going, and then do these butterflies first, and then put more of them, if that makes sense. If you sign up or you become a mem or a follower on Instagram, you'll probably see it. I won't be doing a video because it'll be very similar to this, but here I'm just masking off the butterfly, and I want to get it so it looks like it's behind the butterfly. And I would have done some more of that, some layering. I end up layering these, and I like that look. But at this stage, I'm just testing it out. Valentina has lots of different butterflies, and I could have used different shapes of butterflies. I just chose to keep it simple. Here I'm adding some turquoise blue. So I've used medium magenta, bright aqua, and then turquoise on these butterfly stamps. And here I'm layering this blue one on top. It's going on top of the pink and the bright aqua. And I really like that look. So now if you're doing this on a canvas, the canvas gives. So then stamping becomes a little bit more challenging. And I'm stamping right off the page. So some butterflies look like they're just flying right off the page. Now, when you stamp with acrylic paint, you need to make sure you clean it. I spray it with my Murphy's oil soap, get in there with a nail brush or a stencil brush. Now I grab this stencil called Ethereal. It's a TCW stencil, and I love this motif, and I'm putting the gold on top. Now, any imperfections in the stamping of the butterflies, this pushes it back and you don't focus on it. This gold also works really well with the gold or yellow that's in the butterfly. It just tied everything together. So I'm just adding it wherever I see fit. So again, I may do this, the whole background part, and then do the butterfly afterwards. This way I'm just working my way around the butterfly. It works. They say by the time you're done a project, you know exactly how to do the project, or you know how you would do it differently. So I looked through my sentiment packs and I didn't find one that I wanted. And I really like the idea of stamping with my letter stamps on this. So I always stamp it out on paper to get the placement and the sizes to make sure that everything's going to fit. And then I have white acrylic paint that I'm spreading on my table. My whole table is a glass top. And I stamp in there, and then I'm stamping on Here, I'm not trying to keep them perfectly shaped. I'm not trying to even keep them perfectly spaced. I am wiping it with a baby wipe afterwards to get the paint off. This sentiment actually was a sentiment that is in Valentina's sentiment pack that the butterflies came from. And I love the saying, but of course it was very tiny and wouldn't have shown up on here. I'm working backwards. It's also a good idea to have it in front of you so you don't make an inadvertent spelling mistake. Got a little paint on here, but because everything's acrylic and dry, I can get in there with a baby wipe and correct my mess. So there's the paint. I'm just spreading it on the glass and then I just stamp onto that. I have not been able to find this exact stamp set online, but I did find one that's similar. I've used this size so much on lots of pieces. Follow your butterflies. Now, I could have left it as it was, but I decided that I wanted it a little brighter, a little more opaque. So I grabbed my Fineline applicator bottle and I'm flooding those letters and filling them in to make them bolder and brighter to match the focal image. There's a bit of a texture or edge when you stamp. So this is fairly easy. I just press and flood and use the tip to move the paint around. Slow and steady. But again, you could have left it at just stamped, and there's something very organic about that. And again, I'm turning the page to make it easy for me, and I'm being aware that I don't want to get the paint on my hand. I don't want to rub my hand into the paint. So there you can see the difference. So I'm just flooding it. And making it bold. Taking off the tape that keeps all the paint out of the coils. And then I'm just edging it a little bit with the black, especially where the paint has gone. I just want to make it all black. So we are ready for the recap. Here is this beautiful page. I hope you love it as much as I do. Everything just came together. I really didn't have much of a plan at the beginning. It always surprises me sometimes. So we started using the reverse stencil technique by painting the page with black gesso, putting on the stencil, putting white gesso through the stencil, letting it dry, and then we added color with the makeup sponge. And we blended those colors through the stencil on the makeup sponge, being careful to avoid getting too much paint. Then we grabbed the Fineline applicator and did all the line work. And that just brightened it up and really made the butterfly come to life in my world. Then I stamped with acrylic paint, and I used a brayer to apply the paint to the stamp. That's something that I've just started doing, and I absolutely love how great that works. Then I did some stenciling with that ethereal stencil and some gold paint to add some bling to my page. I added a sentiment, but this time I stamped with my wooden stamps with acrylic paint, and then I filled it in to make it bolder with my Fineline applicator. Thank you so much for joining me. Give me a thumbs up, ask me a question. Follow me on Instagram. Until next time, go get creative.